Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first session of the Met Opera's HD Live in Schools Opera Book Club for the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. My name is Nick Rinehart, and I'm the content manager for education at the Met Opera, and we're so excited to welcome Kazem Abdullah and be joined by students and teachers from HD Live in Schools districts across the country. So Kazem, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Nice to be here, Nick.
So Conductor Kazem Abdullah works internationally, appearing with orchestras such as Atlanta Symphony, Seattle Symphony, Orchestra de Sao Paulo, and New World Symphony, as well as guest conducting with the Metropolitan Opera, Los Angeles Opera, and Lyric Opera of Chicago. He was the music director for the Symphony Orchestra and Opera House in Aachen, Germany from 2012 to 2017. And among his recent orchestral credits are the Oregon, Indianapolis, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati Symphony Orchestras. Abdullah has also guest conducted at companies such as Atlanta Opera, Portland Opera, Detroit Opera, and the Théâtre du Châtelet in Paris, where he led sold-out performances of Scott Joplin's Tremonisha, which happens to be one of my favorite operas. Abdullah made his Met debut in 2009, conducting Gluck's Orfeo ed Eurydice, also one of my favorites. That's coming back in the spring this season at the Met, and just returned for his company, for the company premiere of Anthony Davis's X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X. So as we just noted, you've conducted quite a wide variety of operas, from 18th century Gluck to contemporary opera with Anthony Davis, and it seems like everything in between. And Anthony Davis's opera draws on many styles and influences as a really wide sort of musical palette. How would you describe Davis's operatic style? And how would you describe your approach to conducting this kind of score?
I would say that Anthony Davis's operatic style is definitely based on operatic convention. So like the way he composes is very similar to like many composers like Puccini and Wagner, in that he takes a melody, or he'll take like a motive of music, like, 4 bars, and it will return throughout the various scenes and various acts of the opera. So he definitely knows how to build a whole opera like out of a few small framework things, motives and harmonies and things like this. So he's conventional in that way. How he's very different, though, I think, is his use of, he's managed to take music from the past and insert music of our time. So there's a lot of jazz music in X, and it's not, and what's amazing about Malcolm X is that it's jazz music that actually spans a few decades. So there's jazz music styles like big band, that's from the 30s and 40s, and then as Malcolm X matures, there's music that's from like jazz music like of Miles Davis and John Coltrane, so more modernist jazz that comes in later in the opera from the 1960s. And so so he incorporates jazz music very very beautifully into the score, and there's also some moments of bebop music and funk music from time to time that are also incorporated, and also minimalist aspects of the score. So he's really kind of brought in all these modern kind of ways of writing more modern music, and has blended it with conventional operatic styles and forms and structures, and has made really something new and really exciting.
So when did you first encounter Anthony Davis's work? Was it as a performer or as a conductor? Was it X? Was it something else?
I first encountered Anthony's music as a performer, or really as a conductor, really. And I got to do, I actually, before I did X, I had the opportunity to do his latest opera, which is called Central Park 5. And I did it in Portland, Oregon. And I also did a clarinet concerto that he wrote. And so I did 2 pieces of his prior to doing X. Yeah.
Awesome. So how does your experience performing Davis's music, especially as a soloist for the clarinet concerto, inform the way that you conduct this opera?
Well, I am a clarinetist, which is good. I actually didn't perform it as a clarinetist. I actually conducted it.
Oh, you conducted it.
Played it. But still, because I play the clarinet and I know how the instrument works, I had a good understanding of the technical demands. So like, and like, and this way, like, yeah, because Anthony is, uh, yeah, his instrument is piano, and he was an amazing jazz pianist when he was young. Phenomenal, just a phenomenal, yeah, like John Baptiste like kind of pianist. Really amazing. This was back in the 70s and 80s when he was performing a lot live, but just an incredible musician. And so, like having, yeah, having my background as a clarinetist and sort of working on this concerto with this other clarinetist called Anthony McGill, I really got a sense of Anthony's writing and the technical demands, and also his personality and how it comes out. And so that really informed how I studied his operas and also how I rehearsed them.
Yeah, so students will notice that when they see the opera this Saturday in movie theaters, the score of X is extremely difficult. I was there on opening night, and I don't think anybody envied the job you had of trying to get all of this to work over 3 hours. And one of the challenges is that there is a jazz ensemble inside the orchestra.
Correct.
So it's not just a conventional orchestra pit. There's also this jazz ensemble that is also doing improvisation during the opera. So I'm wondering, how does that impact the rehearsal process when you're working with an orchestra and then also this additional ensemble inside the orchestra? And how do you get everybody to work together and for the whole thing to be cohesive?
Good. Well, I think like exactly what you said. And that's my job as the conductor, so to keep everything cohesive and to keep everyone on the same train track, let's say, so that as like, so for instance, as the cast is learning it, I influence how they need to interpret so that I can bring their own personal things into the work, but also certain things need to be consistent in order for when they do finally meet with the orchestra, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, that what they're doing matches what the orchestra is doing when I rehearse with them. So I'm always trying to get both the people that are on stage and the people in the pit understanding the piece in a similar way, so that they understand how certain rhythms or certain phrases need to be executed, so that when they do finally come together, they're able to like sort of know right away and hear, yeah, I'm playing with this singer, or this instrument in the pit is playing my line, and oh yeah, actually I'm not, like, so so that they just have an understanding of certain things about the piece, so that yeah, my job as a conductor is to make sure that everyone sort of begins to know what to listen for and know what to latch onto, so that there's a mutual understanding across everyone in the opera which is like nearly like like 100 something people, including the dancers. Like even the dancers, they have to also, like, even though they're mostly counting beats, they also have to sort of learn how to listen and know what to listen for, so they know what to do.
Right, and there are sections in the score where it says like jazz, like trumpet improv 1 minute, or something like that. So how are you timing? And I just can only imagine how difficult it would be to let an ensemble improvise for a certain amount of time, but then everybody has to come in on a beat, and you're also coordinating with singers and dancers on stage. It seems kind of impossible.
Yeah, no, that's true. There are multiple moments where people have to improv, and there are moments where it's actually free improvisation and where I can just let the person go. And usually in those moments, I'm looking at a particular picture on stage, and at a certain point in the drama or whatever mime drama is happening during the improv, then I need to go on and continue with the opera. But there's also improvisations that have to happen, say, within 4 measures or 16 measures, where we really have to decide, okay, you have like the freedom to play what you need to play, but this player needs to know, well, what's happening is this. And so therefore you need to have like something like a solo that's more anxious or anxiety, or maybe for this solo that's 8 bars, it needs to be more flowing and calm and caressing. So yeah, these discussions were had in the rehearsal process, so that certain solos, they knew that they had to have a real structure to it, or certain improvisations and some could be a little bit more free.
Great. So I'd love to move to some student questions that came in from across the country, starting with a question that we got all the way from Honolulu, Hawaii. And I'm going to pull up a video, and then we...
Aloha.
Exactly. gonna bring up a video and then also have the question on screen.
Okay.
Hi, what was the difference between conducting this opera in Detroit versus New York?
So the question is, what is the difference between conducting the opera in Detroit and New York? And I believe you're also going to conduct it in Seattle later this season.
I am. Yeah, I'm going to conduct it in Seattle. Yeah. So
yeah. What's the process of taking it from one opera house to another, especially when they're different sizes, different ensembles in some cases?
Yeah. Well, the thing about Detroit, when we did it in Detroit, that was the first time the piece had been done in 35 years. So it was basically like everyone was starting with kind of a clean slate. There are some people that did it in Detroit that are doing it here at the Met, but the biggest difference between Detroit and the Met is the size of everything, because the Met is a much bigger space. Like, the Detroit Opera House maybe has like 2,500 seats, and the Met has 3,800 seats. So that's already like 1,000 more seats. So the Met just has much more spaces to fill, and the Met also being in New York City and like one of the largest opera houses in the world, they have a certain budget that allows them to be able to do larger productions. So, for instance, all the principal singers are this same number, but we have more of the ensemble. So in Detroit, there was an ensemble of 12. And here at the Met, we have an ensemble of 48, so 4 times as many people sing the ensemble roles, which are both sometimes soloists and then also function as chorus. So it's just a much larger thing. In Detroit, we only had 4 dancers. Here we have nearly 20 dancers. So it's just everything is larger and bigger. There's there's more supernumeraries. The costumes are much grander and bigger, and because there's 48 people, that the variety of costumes is much greater. So some people have to wear 2 or 3 different costumes in the course of the evening and things like this. And then there's these Afrofuturistic costumes that people will see when they see the HD on Saturday that are just the most amazing costumes you'll ever see. So that's kind of what it is. And also the orchestra is bigger. So when I did it in Detroit, I believe I had 9 first violins, 7 seconds, 4 violas, 4 celli, 2 basses. And here I have 12 first, 10 seconds, 8 cellos, 8 violas, 6 basses. And so the string section is of course bigger. So there's just a lot. Everything is just a lot more people.
And I assume that totally changes the way that you conduct and rehearse something. If you have 2 or 4 cellos versus 8, do you totally have to rearrange your sense of dynamics? And
you have to arrange, you have to change your sense of dynamics and proportion. So you have to get people in a lot of ways to play softer, especially because you have more people. You have to get you have to get a little it's like you have to bring more people into to focus in a certain way. But the main difference, I would say, the Opera House in Detroit, of course, is a very good one, and they were the ones that spearheaded this project. But when you come to the Met, there's really no place like it, especially working with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. I would say to the students, listen to this orchestra. They're literally one of the best orchestras in the world. When I think of the best orchestras in the world, I think the Berlin Philharmonic and Chicago Symphony. The Met Orchestra is up there right with them, and this orchestra, the musicians in it are just phenomenal. And so there's a way in which when you're working with this the highest level musicians in the world, that it makes the work in some ways a lot easier, because they bring their own sense of musicianship and intellect also into the process. So it's been interesting for me to work on this piece in Detroit and then at the Met, because there are ways of approaching the piece and ways of playing the piece that I did not have in Detroit that I've had here, that have opened my ears and opened my mind to, wow, this how far you can go with interpreting Anthony's music. And so it's been for me, it's just been a thrilling process. Especially to work with everyone across the board has been amazing. And Donald Palumbo, the chorus master, who's here, just a phenomenal conductor and musician, and to hear how he worked with the chorus and built up their knowledge of the piece too was just amazing. So yeah, when you come to a place like the Met, you're really working with some of the best people in the world, and that is both an education, even though I've done the piece before, but also just a joy. I have to say, it's just amazing.
So what from the experience conducting in New York can you take to see? Are you also doing it in Chicago or just Seattle?
I'm going in Seattle for sure. I don't know when Chicago is doing.
Okay.
Yeah, they're supposed to do it, but I have no idea what their plans are.
So what can you take from conducting it in the Met, knowing that like Seattle is going to be again a totally different place,
Yeah,
different
but
cast,
yeah, you know what's funny? I was thinking about that this morning because I yeah, because I was going through the score because I had a short musical rehearsal just before this StreamYard session we're doing now, and I was thinking about how like the orchestra in Seattle, the Seattle Symphony plays for the Seattle Opera, and I've worked with this orchestra before, an excellent orchestra as well, and in a way they are kind of in a way lucky because like now I've done this opera twice in two very different ways, and the production in Seattle will be more similar to the one in Detroit, but there will be certain things from the Met that will go to Seattle so that it won't be quite like Detroit. But I think definitely the orchestra in Seattle, they will also do an amazing job. I've worked with these musicians and some amazing orchestra as well, and they like what I think will be great is that now that I've gone through this process in two very different ways, I will know the best way to work with this particular opera company and this orchestra so that they will know it, like really like I'll be able to guide them at every single moment about what they need to do and how they need to do it even more concisely, more yeah, it's just so that they will really get a really deep understanding of the piece, especially oh yeah, like like I've worked with these musicians before, and some cast people are also going to be there. So yeah, like I'm expecting it to also be an exciting thing to do in Seattle.
Great. So you spoke earlier about playing the clarinet. So this is a question from Namby in Silver Spring, Maryland. At one point in your career, did you make the change from clarinet to conducting? And what education did you need to make this change?
Really great question. So it was a gradual change. It wasn't like from one day to the next I said, oh, I'm going to be a conductor. I had already done some conducting when I was in high school I played in bands and youth orchestras all through my yeah, I played in bands and youth orchestras from probably the age of 10, from when I started playing in band and orchestra all the time. And I always saw the conductor, and like at a certain point I got to I started to see major symphony orchestras play. Like I remember like my mom took me on a trip to see the Chicago Symphony, and just hearing them live and seeing them with who was conducting them at the time, it just made like an amazing impression. And then I sort of started to think, oh yeah, that's something I'd like to try to do. And so but I got very good advice when I was in high school from a teacher, my clarinet teacher, and he was like, "That's great, you want to be a conductor, Kazim, but make sure you're the best possible musician you can be on your instrument." He said that's going to be really important. So, like study scores, learn symphonies, take this learn the scores of the pieces, the symphonies you're playing in youth orchestra, but make sure that you are really the best possible musician. So then at that point I thought, okay, well, let me focus on being the best clarinetist I can be. And I had the first goal was to try to become a principal clarinetist of a major orchestra. And so yeah, that like so I went to college, I studied clarinet. I always kind of would learn scores all the time, even though I was focused on becoming a solo clarinetist in an orchestra. I did music festivals. Basically, what I would say to anyone is you just have to acquire as much musical experience. Play in the pit in musicals, play at an opera if you can, sing in a choir. Even if you're an instrumentalist, sing in like you're like be involved in as much musical activity as you can, because all of that stuff contributes to your knowledge and understanding of music and your knowledge and understanding of different instruments, the singing voice, knowing how to play the piano. Like you really want, like you need to. So that's the thing. If you want to be a conductor, you have to focus on one thing and be really, really good at it. But then you also need to branch out from time to time so that your total experience is broad. And so that's what I would say the education aspect is. Of course, you can go to university and technically study conducting, but that, like, just like a person can go to film school, but to be a director and to direct the movie, those are two different things. And it's the same with conducting. You, like, and a lot of it, I would say 90% of it is about how you learn everything about music and how to prepare music and how to study music, all of those things. So knowing about music history, knowing music theory, knowing how to play in chamber music, knowing how to work with a singer, having sung in a chorus, then knowing how to address these things. And you can only learn all those things is in the course of your life as you're a teenager in your 20s, that you gather these experiences. I mean, go study languages. When I was 18 and 19, I got the chance to go to music festivals in Germany. And yeah, like when I had already finished my undergraduate studies and I was kind of working professionally as a clarinetist, I spent a summer studying in Italian in Florence. I spent a whole summer in Florence, Italy. And so, one has, and I was like 23, I think, at that time. So you have to constantly keep developing and learning so that when you arrive at a point when you're older, you can fall back on all of those experiences you had, and they inform how you work with all the professional people that you have to work with and guide and stuff like this. So it's one of these things. I compare being a conductor to being a film director. You have to know a lot about many things, but at the same time, you have to have gone through the trenches of focusing on one thing so that you're at least good at that one thing, because that will also train you about how, like, so for instance, as a clarinetist, which was my main instrument and my main gateway into the music world, yeah, I had to take auditions and things like this. And sometimes I was successful, sometimes I was not. I did concerto competitions. And from the act of learning concertos and memorizing them and competing, I learned how to build a stamina, mental stamina, musical stamina, and knowing about what that process is. That it just so all the things you do will inform your work if someone is interested in conducting. But you have to, yeah, it's a journey. It's not something you can necessarily study in a 2-year degree.
Right. So this I actually don't know. Did you go to school for conducting at any point?
I started to. So this is interesting. So I didn't. I went to school for a year, basically. So I had already, like, I was kind of. I got my undergraduate as a clarinet major in music. And then I did this thing called the New World Symphony in Miami Beach. This is like a pre-professional orchestra kind of thing. And I did that. And it was while I was there where I decided, I think I'm going to go ahead and make the transition to conducting. When I went to New World, I had already done major things as a conducting student. Like I went to the conducting school at Aspen Music Festival and done many master classes with some of the major teachers. And then when I decided to go to only do conducting, I had to kind of change gears. And so I went to school with the plan of going for 2 years, but it ended up being just a year and basically a semester. And so the 1 year I went to the Peabody Conservatory for a year, and it was in some ways a good experience. I got what I needed out of that school experience. And then I ended up getting a job after the end of that first year. And then I also did like sort of a semester a semester studying in Stockholm with a famous Finnish conducting teacher. So that was that. And so I didn't actually finish my degree. I actually, because I had gotten a job and I needed, the point you go to school is to get a job, not just to go to school. So there's like, it wasn't going to make a difference actually in the end whether or not I completed this degree or not, because I already did have a degree. I got a bachelor's degree, and so it was good.
conducting school dropout. Obviously, everything worked out in that area.
Yeah.
So this is our last question from Sophia in Bangor, Maine. How does it feel to work in a predominantly white profession, and how was it special to be portraying this story at the Met? And I guess we could also say it, in Detroit and eventually in Seattle.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the first question. There are some times where I don't think about it being a predominantly white profession. I only feel that way if a certain company or orchestra makes me feel that way, if I can say. And that could be from anything from how they decide to engage with me. If if they decide to engage with me as an equal professional that has experience in things like this and has something to offer, then I know that they are serious about the work that I can bring to their orchestra, their opera house. There, of course, have been places where it's like that has not always been the case, for sure, and I usually try to avoid working at those places. But I can say for the Met has always been a place that has embraced me. I'm like, I feel so honored, and and I feel particularly honored to have had this chance to do this opera about Malcolm X, who at one point lived in New York and was living and working and doing stuff just a few blocks north of here many, many moons ago. And to have this chance to lead this company in this piece is basically like one of the highest honors of my life. And I'm so grateful to the Met for bringing it here and asking me to lead it. It's one of really, like I would say, one of I can imagine when I look back on my life, maybe hopefully 50 years from now, I will live a nice, long, fruitful life. And I'll think about this. It's really been a joy, just like, yes, and this is what I'm talking about. The Met, they put all of their resources, all of their energy into making this show the success that it's become. And so when I've been here, I felt very much at home. And yes, and and like to go back to the first part of the question, sometimes it does feel there are moments maybe where it feels a little bit lonely, but I think it's important to find people that if you're a non-white person working in a predominantly white field, to find those people who understand you and appreciate you for who you are and what you bring, that have not about your race but about what your personality and what your humanity is as a person. And when I've gone to those sorts of places, I always feel at home and good, and that's what I would encourage anyone to do. If you're feeling, oh, this was awkward, that just be yourself and be prepared, and the rest will take care of itself. Because if you know who you are as a person, if you know that I know what I'm doing and I do it well, and you feel confident about that, the rest will take care of itself. Any anxiety you might feel about being a minority person in a majority situation.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned New York and Malcolm X, because he also spent a lot of time in Detroit.
Yeah.
So far you've conducted in the two of the big cities that Malcolm X lived in, worked in at various stages in his development. So it's cool that you were able to conduct in those cities where those communities are still very much there.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you so much for joining us, Kazem. We're about at time. We know you have rehearsals to run to. So on behalf of our HD Live in School students and educators, thank you so much again. And we are looking forward to seeing X in theaters on Saturday. So thanks so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.